of this season. So I'm sorry, LeBron. I'm sorry, Cavaliers. I'm glad you're going to get to the finals again, I think, but you won't beat Houston or Golden State. And so I'd rather Golden State be the one to beat LeBron again, because it just gives me an excuse in our argument about who's the greatest of all time.
Well, if they do win, you'll have to put your LeBoner away. Well, that's a strange argument that you made, but I guess there's some kind of point to be made there. I think we're done with segment 1 now. That's probably a wrap for this one. But these conference finals, hopefully that they're going to be good. We get the epic one that we wanted in the West. But Eric and I was talking about before the show, sometimes these overhyped games or series don't always live up to it. That's what makes me nervous. But we'll have that covered next week on the show as we get to Season 2, Episode 2 next week. So that's a wrap for segment 1. When we come back in segment 2, we got a couple quick topics to talk about in Talkworthy. What's going on with Ben Roethlisberger? He had a strange interview last week about Mason Rudolph. NASCAR, is it really going to go up for sale? And is there a licking problem in the NHL? We'll have all that and more when we come back.
As we always do in segment 2, it's time for Talkworthy. We'll take a couple of quick topics from the current events around the world of sports. This week, we've heard from Ben Roethlisberger what he thinks about the Pittsburgh Steelers and the draft of Mason Rudolph. Justin, as you hear his comments and you kind of think through where the Steelers are headed in the future, not only with Roethlisberger, but with Mason Rudolph sitting behind him, what's your impressions of this situation?
I think Ben looks like a complete idiot. I mean, he's the guy that came out just last season after the Jacksonville game and started talking about retirement. He's talked about retirement a lot. We've talked about on this show how much he's talked about it with he doesn't know how long he wants to play. He's worried about CTE. Well, what are you supposed to do if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers? I mean, just because he comes out and says, oh, yeah, I plan on playing the next 3 to 5 years unless I get hurt. Well, I mean, we all have plans to do stuff. I mean, we plan to play golf at some point, but we never know what's going to come up into our schedule. So Pittsburgh can't just rely on, oh, yeah, Ben wants to play this many years unless he gets hurt or unless, something else comes out that he decides to retire. We've spent a lot of time talking about Pittsburgh. They don't have a plan B at quarterback, and it sure is not Landry Jones, and it doesn't look like it's Josh Dobbs. So
I think Cordell Stewart's still available.
He probably is. I'm
Michael
sure.
Vick.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of guys out there. Johnny Manziel's even out there. I mean, there's all these guys, but Pittsburgh had a round 1 grade on Mason Rudolph. They picked him up in the 3rd round. It's an extremely cheap insurance policy for them. What have we seen really good teams do? You draft a quarterback in the middle rounds, you develop him, you get him out there in the preseason, you give teams a snippet, and then if your starter decides he wants to keep going, you can always trade him and get assets. So I understand Ben wants a good player in round 3, but the Steelers have to protect themselves as an organization. And if Rudolph's the future, that's a cheap way to get the future in the 3rd round. So Ben's a drama queen. He always has been. I mean, he gets carted off for a freaking pinky injury on his hand. They'll bring the card out and take him off. And then he comes back in and acts like he's Willis Reed, and it's game 7 of the finals and he's going to hit the game-winning shot and throw the big pad or whatever. He's just, everything about him, there's always drama around him. So his answer he just looks like a jerk. He just looks like he's this, he's worried there could be a quarterback competition. Well, dumbass, you're the one that started this by saying that you wanted to retire. I don't think Pittsburgh would have went out if you would have said, you know what, I love what Tom Brady and Drew Brees are doing. I plan to continue to play unless I'd have a catastrophic injury. If you say something like that, Pittsburgh probably does it. But when you come out after a game and talk about, I don't know if I have it, maybe I'm done here, I think you're going to raise some eyebrows, and Pittsburgh's a pretty well-run organization. So, of course, they're going to go draft a quarterback.
Yeah, the fact that he thinks that, Mason Rudolph's not a good player, good enough for the 3rd round is ridiculous as well. To Ben Roethlisberger's credit, there has been times through the last couple seasons when his O-line has given him almost zero protection. He is, as far as getting hit behind the line and picking himself up off the turf, he takes a lot of beating back there. But there are times when he peels himself up off the grass, and I almost feel like he's going to retire at that moment, like in the middle of the game, like he's just going to turn around and start walking toward the tunnel. So the fact that the Steelers want to draft, I think, a pretty good quarterback out of college in a late round, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. And so there's no way Ben's playing another 3 to 5 years. I'm sorry, but he is a big guy. He's not in the same condition that Tom Brady is. There's no way he's playing another 3 to 5 years. Mason Rudolph is the type of quarterback that Pittsburgh could have if he develops well. into the next Pittsburgh quarterback for a long time, it makes perfect sense. Look, I'm a Philly fan. I'm not a Steelers fan. But if I were a Steelers fan, I would have no issue with them drafting Mason Rudolph and having him as insurance over Landry Jones, Cordell Stewart, Michael Vick, Johnny Manziel, or whoever else they want to pull off the street in Pittsburgh.
And he should be able to look across the state and look at what Philly had with a good backup quarterback when Wentz got hurt.
Good point.
I mean, Carson Wentz doesn't have an ego enough to be like, oh, you guys need to trade Nick Foles. I can't play behind a guy that won the Super Bowl. He understands the situation of what you have to have good backups. I think Ben likes Landry Jones because he's not a threat, and maybe he sees Mason Rudolph as a potential threat. But this whole thing about, I'm not going to help him and I'm not going to do this, I mean, get over yourself. That's ridiculous. Something else that's ridiculous, Eric, I tweeted you about this week. Some comments. We've talked about this before with NASCAR. We talked about some of the issues we have. We try to come at to bring them up. We always try to have solutions with it, or why they're occurring, or the fact that really a lot of the people that are involved in the sport don't want to talk about it when it comes to ratings, when it comes to attendance, car counts. Everybody has an excuse that's in the industry. We saw it this week with Dave Moody, who's a host on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. He's also on Fox Sports on Race Hub. He has a weekly spot on there talking about the fact that he thinks the next TV deal could be the same or even bigger than the one they currently have that we've talked about seems now completely ridiculous. Well, it comes out that NASCAR, the NASCAR family, the France family, has actually hired Goldman Sachs to look at the possible sale of NASCAR, which doesn't speak to me that they think the sport's in a very good spot. So that report to me, Eric, was pretty shocking. These rumors have been going on for about a decade now, but this seems about like the most solid that we've seen. So what do you think the sale of NASCAR speaks to the sport?
First, I need to apologize to one of our listeners. I was chatting online with one of our listeners from England. Yes, that's right, Justin, England. Craig Thomas, one of our listeners from England, says, you lose me a little bit when you talk about NASCAR, just simply because I love your show, but over here in England, we don't really know much about NASCAR. So, Craig, bear with us for just a minute. We'll get to NHL licking in just a second. But in NASCAR, this is the craziest thing. The talking heads that have radio shows on NASCAR are so lost in their own thoughts about what this sport used to be. We are not filling racetracks. If the France family is thinking about selling NASCAR, it would not surprise me one bit, because they own half the tracks, first of all, with the Speedway Corporation that they have. And so they're seeing ticket sales decline big time. If any of these people think that the TV deal is going to be huge or bigger than it is now in the next reinstallment of that deal, the only way that that would make sense is if they stop selling actual tickets to go to races and then just tell everybody to watch on TV, because they're going to come out with a technology package that makes it better to watch on TV than it is to be there at the race. That's the only way that that makes sense. Or if they actually have a social media presence with digital content and streaming and everything else that they should have done 5 to 6 years ago to get ready for this trend of on-demand viewership. The way that people consume content now is way different. And you look at these leagues like the NBA and the NFL who have kept up with those types of things. You saw the NFL do that camera that looks like the Madden video game camera from behind the quarterback. That's what kids are used to. That's what kids like. And by the way, that was awesome. I love that camera. I would be fine if they did that the whole game, because it shows you the field. And for guys like us who like sports and really study sports, you can see the routes that the receivers are running. You can see the defensive coverage from a different perspective than the camera that shows you from the side of the field. NASCAR, you are way behind on all of that stuff. Show us in-car. Show us different ways that you can experience the race from a digital content perspective. But Justin, they are out of their freaking mind if they think that this TV deal is going to be huge. You have a title sponsor in Monster Energy that until a couple weeks ago wasn't sure if they were going to even re-sign. And then they did re-sign for 1 year. It's not like people are lined up at the gates to sponsor NASCAR and get into this. That's why we talk about in season 2, we're going to have a fundraiser to get Talkback Podcasts on the side of the car of Matt DiBenedetto and that Go Fast Racing team. It's because we love this sport. We believe that the action of this sport can be as good as it once was. But these teams need funding. This sport needs funding. And this sport needs to come into a different generation. A lot of these drivers that are doing social media and trying to keep up with the trends, like Matt DiBenedetto, like Brad Keselowski, like Dale Earnhardt Jr., and hopefully Kyle Busch and others are going to gravitate toward that and get into that because that's what's going to save this sport. But these guys thinking that TV deals are going to be huge and sponsorship deals are going to be huge and we're going to sell out racetracks, I'll tell you what Goldman Sachs is going to tell Bill France. They're going to tell him to sell it and walk away as fast as you can.
One of the biggest problems is they don't want to acknowledge they have a problem from the media perspective. They want to just brush everything under the carpet. On that same Twitter thread, there was a conversation between Dave Moody and fans were challenging him similar to what we're saying. And one of his statements were...
You mean fans actually know what we're talking about?
Yeah, and this is someone that's considered, the godfather of and this and that, said that, NASCAR draws an average of what a Super Bowl does. I mean, that's just like how asinine of a comment. Number one, the Super Bowl is... They could sell as many tickets as they wanted to the Super Bowl, and they start at like $500 a pop. That you can't just build extra seats in. I mean, Jerry Jones tried, they collapsed, and all the kinds of hell broke loose in there. But you're limited to the amount of seats in a stadium. And you go to a place like Talladega that's got 100,000. Their most expensive ticket's probably what, $125, $150 to sit in the best seating in the top of the grandstand. And you're starting to talk about seats that are 3, 5, 10, 20 times that much at a Super Bowl, and you have more people at the Super Bowl than you do. Richmond did not have 100,000 people there. I mean, that's just fact. They don't even have 100,000 seats anymore. Dover is cutting seats out at a massive rate, and they still can't fill what they have.
Dover, Bristol, and Martinsville are the only tracks close to what a football stadium looks like, and we just talked about that a few weeks ago with the Bristol race. You watch on television and you see that 60% of those seats are empty.
Yeah, and that's being very generous to say 60%. I mean, there is a problem. We had friends that had tickets at Richmond for 20 plus years. They had to give them up for health reasons. Richmond and no one from that racetrack called them to say, why, as a 20-year ticket holder, would you not renew? My family has had tickets at Dover since the late 90s, and we actually gave them up this year because my wife is due and we didn't know what would happen, didn't want to be away. No one from the racetrack called and said, hey, as ticket holders since the 90s with the same seats, why would you give those up? No one did. And with my Dover tickets, I used to get 2 free seats, 50-some rows up in a turn. That's how desperate they were to just get people to the racetrack.
Yeah, thank you for those, by the way.
Yeah, so to sit there and say that you don't have a problem, or to try to even make any comparison to the NFL. When the NFL drops 10% in ratings, the media goes ape. I mean, they go absolutely crazy trying to talk about this story. NASCAR over the last decade has over a 50% reduction in ticket sales, much less the fact that most of these tracks are reducing their seating numbers, and they want to sweep it under the rug as people that are talking to fans and engaging with them. They don't want to listen. They just want to get defensive. You have to recognize you have a problem. And Eric, it's factual. It's visual. You can see. I've been going to races since I was 12 and 13 years old. I can remember sitting in traffic for 2 and 3 hours. Now I've go to races. You get in your car and you drive straight out of the racetrack. Kyle Busch even alluded to that in his junior podcast he did, where he said, we used to have to helicopter out, or we used to have to do this back when it was harder to get out of the stands. We don't have that problem anymore. Everybody sees it, but the media, then they want to get defensive. And I just frankly don't understand why. Why wouldn't you want to understand why fans aren't watching, why they're not engaged, instead of getting all defensive about it? The numbers are there that prove that you're wrong, and you look like an idiot when you get on there and do that. You just look like a homer. Well, that'll do it for NASCAR. One last topic. We talked about this in the opener. The strangest story that I think I've ever seen. Boston Bruins player Brad Marchand has been warned by the league now and several times to stop licking the opponent. Eric, we were talking about this from a work perspective. I mean, can you imagine like your HR department like sending you an email of like, Mr. Eric Nesbitt, will you please stop licking your clients? It's a bad look for the organization, or we're going to have to. I just can't believe that there's not like they've let this go on this long. I mean, hockey's got as many issues as NASCAR in terms of viewership, where it's just like the hardcore people watch. And now your main story is about one of your best players licking his opponents? That is insane.
Well, I'm not that much of a germaphobe, but like I said in the opener...
Oh, I am.
I
carried Purell around when he came up. I just scored him in the face with it.
Yeah, I mean, the thought of licking another human being in the face just never crosses my mind. I just can't fathom that, let alone in an athletic environment. I mean, can you imagine like LeBron James, getting back and forth with like a Lance Stevenson and then being like, all right, I'm going to lick you.
I mean, even Lance has enough sense not to lick him. I mean, he just blew in his ear. I mean, that's weird enough, but he didn't like lick him across the face.
I'm not even a germaphobe in that